familiar faces and also very much those who are less familiar to me to the first large gathering of ARTNET, and in fact the first event that we're having in this building at West Central Street. And in a sense, for me, this is on several levels a very emotional occasion, because it was Eduardo who I first heard when I was a spotty youth up from Bournemouth. The second day I came to the A, there was this incredible slideshow by Eduardo Paolozzi. The date was 1958, and in fact the slides, as I saw on the light table a couple of hours ago, are tremendously different. But this is really a strange occasion for another reason, because although I'm not going to use this next few minutes to bore you with a long description of what I think ARTNET will be, might be, could be, or what, rather more particularly, I hope at least, I think there's about 50% of the people sitting here who in the next few weeks I'm going to tap on the shoulder and ask to do something in this room, and that's really why you're here. The symbolism, in a sense, of Eduardo, if he'll forgive me, is a considerable one, because it's probably no secret to any of you that the primary function of ARTNET will be to make things and do things and record things in the field of the visual arts and in the field of architecture. And I'm not going to give you any of that sort of bullshit about the two arts merging, or, you know, how we can interact or something. What I would much prefer to any artificiality of such a symbiosis would be an informed observation from one to the other. I think this would be quite a nice thing to happen in the next few years in this town. And I'm not really going to say any more. I think Eduardo has done so much, and that for me is the primary reason why he is here, over and above all the rest. I can say no more about him than he's inspired me for the last 18 years. Eduardo. Oh, now the thing I did, yes. Only another 10 minutes. About 2 weeks ago, before he flew off to Berlin, Eduardo said, well, let's make it very formal. And we went into, having both played at being academics, we said, you know, you could have the glass of water, but we've got sort of replacement glass of water, and a lectern, which doubles as a loudspeaker, and the slides, and the audience in chairs, and the whole academic lecture bit. But I don't think we're going to be able to sustain that tremendously, and in fact he's changed his mind this afternoon. He said, look, how about it being sort of loose-limbed, and, you know, maybe you do the talking. And I said, also. And you know, they can ask questions and all that stuff. So basically he wants you to chat back at him, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
And all that kind of thing, and when you finish there's some more plonk and so on. Eduardo.
Well, really, I'd really like to, what Peter didn't say, that most of the slideshows I did do in the past, under Sandy, I did a lot of, I was sort of curious that when I was at the Slade, there was a lot of bad lectures and at the Ruskin School, there was a lot of bad lectures that one tended to fall asleep. And even then, when one was quite young, there was a sort of the formalism, the sort of, even then, that whole Niagara of cliches, in a way, used to sort of be very soporific. And even though it was a painter that one quite liked, like Caravaggio or Piero di Cosimo, the lecturer managed to massacre the subject. But it did build up in me a very kind of complex idea of being rather anti-formal lecture. Hence, that's why Peter did say about, I didn't really want it very formal, but on the other hand, I think that Peter had an idea of it. I somehow felt that he wanted to show all his new toys and maybe have 6, so Charles Eames style, so 6 transparencies on at the same time with 4 simultaneous soundtracks and so on. But I mean, although I can't get to it in a way, I still have an idea of a kind of formal idea of presentation and a formal idea of language. But I really find that as I've become more kind of obsessive about drawing and painting and making sculpture, it doesn't seem to, within this sort of diagram of being an obsessive, it doesn't seem to leave much room for making a very articulate set of words with the images that one's very preoccupied by. And I don't know, one has to treat certain facts seriously, that certain very good painters would never dream of giving a lecture. I mean, as an imaginary exercise. I mean, could one imagine Francis Bacon giving a lecture? But a few of the things that I want to touch on are just really the sort of comedy of paradoxes in this sense. Paradox one is that the title of this sort of slideshow is, although it links the idea of Ipswich and Berlin, it begins with two simultaneous slides of Japan. The reason that this came about, I went over officially on the 19th of May under this program, German program called the DAD, where they invite foreign artists to come and work in this sort of cultural limbo. And there are very good reasons for doing this. But I found that when I went to this reception to meet the other artists, I immediately fell in with two Japanese sculptors that I knew in Japan. So in this German museum, this very famous German museum, we were talking about the old days in Japan. So the first two slides are really Japanese. Is that the wrong button?
Well, yeah.
Let's start again. There we are. So I mean, title of the talk is Berlin and Ipswich, but there we were in Berlin talking about our days together working in Japan. And I went there with Philip King, sponsored by the Iron and Steel Federation, to make a sculpture for Osaka, which we'll see a bit later on. And then there is the arrival. And in the evenings, when we were all very bored, we went down to the pleasure quarters. This is the first Ipswich slide, and on the left there is the first Berlin slide. And one of the things that's quite strong in Berlin, there's a tremendous difference what one reads about in the press, and I find this whole kind of political notion there, this kind of showing off, having lunch in the Springer building overlooking East Berlin. It's the tallest building, it's practically on top of the wall. Yet at night time, one's terribly conscious of the East Berlin radio tower. But I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted to go to Berlin, in the same way that I wanted to go to California and teach at Berkeley, was to catch up in an autobiographical sense with one's traumatic childhood memory traces, in a sense. And I mean, these are two sort of metaphors for me for being in Berlin. On the right, there's this curious kind of comedy, this a lot of kind of connections between German playwrights and German music on the right. And then the curious kind of double autobiographical connection with the slide on the left, which was a slide I showed at the ICA. But I get this idea very, very strong when I'm in Berlin. I just have this kind of go crazy with these memory traces of the Berlin past. And this is on the right. I mean, when I did a lecture show in Cambridge once, I had, curiously enough, this sort of this picture from the Telegraph of this giant eagle being cut up. So this is in my mind while I'm talking to Mr. Enai at the German Folk Museum about our walking down the pleasure quarters of Tokyo. And on the right, of course, there's this other kind of, which is a very good metaphor about the divided city. And then on the left, there is a sort of this idea of this kind of German preoccupation with folk culture and beer cellars, and so you've got a kind of rather nice double metaphor there. Well, here, meanwhile, back in Japan, this is the sculpture that I did out there, and there's a small study on the right. And this was done through a large factory using stainless steel. The sides are 3 millimeters, and there was a special slot in the middle for children to crawl through. Another two good metaphors. The one is a sort of Japanese robot on the right, and then you have this kind of link. I've never experienced German nightlife, but this is in a sort of sort of cabaret sense. This is my idea of, I mean, it probably doesn't exist. It's all there in my mind. Is this idea of a cabaret on the left, really. Much better than cabaret. And, well, this is, one is a truth, and the other one is a lie. This is a sort of tourist, the Philharmonie Hall, which, ironically, one may be there on the evening of the 6th for a Lionel Hampton concert. And on the right, there is the weekends in Tokyo, with outlined, I don't know if you can see it, the Fairmont Hotel. But what I'd really like to just touch on, probably badly, in showing these slides, is the whole kind of series of creative, how the whole creative process is full of very very complex paradoxes. And this to me is a very natural combination of how one would think in Berlin. And also at the same party on the 19th, there were two American artists, and one talked about Berkeley and one talked about Las Vegas, and on the left there's a sort of another fantasy Las Vegas type image, but it's also ironically a sort of Japanese nightclub image. This that is the Europa Center, another sort of hurriedly brought at the airports where one might go in the evenings. There isn't, I don't think there's a great deal goes on in Berlin, not like London, in Berlin in the evenings. And this is a big kind of complex with restaurants and other sort of, curiously enough, there's sort of restaurants like that in Japanese with kind of complex lives on different levels. And then there's this curious kind of Weinstube image that overhangs the, which you may find this kind of image in the Europa Center. Well, also, there's an image of Tokyo, and on the left, the Olympic Stadium. Of course, before I left, I had lunch with a man called Siedler, who is head of Propylaen, and he gave me this book, which is the American edition of Adolf Hitler, which by Joachim Fest, which is a very fascinating book, really. And in a roundabout way, this is another of the kind of shadows that sort of which are at one's elbow, the world of Speer, in a sense. Well, the title was, this is meanwhile back at Ipswich, four sculptures on the left, but this is another of my sort of memory traces of the image on the right, is that before I went to Germany, I just absolutely hypnotized by the whole idea of the war, in a way, and the idea of, I read all the books, the Nuremberg Raid and Hamburg raids, and the idea of people being burnt alive. But there's another curious thing, is that when I was in the offices of the DAD, a very nice man called Thomas Decker had this old catalogue, about 3 years old, of an exhibition that was in Vienna of the paintings and drawings and works of Schoenberg, paintings of Schoenberg, and images of Anton Webern. And there was two very strange death masks, one of Webern, another one of Schoenberg. I didn't know they had done. I thought that Schoenberg would have these Californian years. I thought he might have, and if you read Schoenberg's letters, I thought he had died in an anonymous way. But there's this extraordinary death mask in plaster of this reclining head. So you get, which is what interests me, this curious kind of double metaphor of an old image. I mean, that image actually is what I call a survival from the days when I was at Slade. There was a very good medical bookshop called Lewis's, which one used to get books for, in these days, for threepence and sixpence. And I was always kind of intrigued by this, and there were students at the Slade who used to go to the medical part and draw pickled heads in a way, and I could never, curiously enough, face it somehow. But I've made a kind of connection between this sort of my own autobiography and one's present autobiography, and this idea of actually the possibility of doing a head of Schoenberg, which comes in with a sort of the German experience. And, well, the German experience, again, is this image from an old book of some... Peter, do you know what that is? It's some sort of German building, which is from... I don't know what it means, really. It's a sort of German building, somehow. Sort of mad. But, I mean, it's quite interesting. Coming from England, it's very interesting. This incredible book of Berlin in the last days, of just seeing what one can pick up in the form of memory traces, really, of the old empire. And I mean, this is a double. I mean, whenever I speak to people about Berlin, they think there's a sort of sensational nightlife, like sort of figure on the right. And well, meanwhile, Mr. Imai has appeared at the DAD offices, and that's the Japanese government building on the left in Tokyo. So we're talking about Tokyo again. Well, I'm thinking about non-existent German nightlife. Well, I find the one on the left is also... One on the left, I think, is very good. It's a sort of out of an old 30s book on catastrophe. But I mean, this is... which, in a way, is very strong. But I think I've explained to you some of the reasons of why going to Berlin, of sort of catching up and sort of tidying up one's memory traces. One wonders what other areas will be left. I mean, I don't think there's much room in Finland, somehow. And, but I did judo for about 7 years, and one of the reasons for going to Japan was to actually, what I call, see the real thing there. And we had a lot of championships there when I was there. So on the left, one has, this is another airport photograph of the National Gallery with the Philharmonie in the background and the church, which I was told Mies van der Rohe wanted to preserve. And on the right there's a bit of sort of popular Japanese art. I'm just not really showing off with this poster, but I have had sort of long connections in Germany. Originally I went in the 50s. I did a fountain for the Festival of Britain. And curiously enough, the present director of the National Gallery in Berlin, he was in Hamburg, and I went over there and did some fountains there in the early 50s. It was a very strange Germany. And then much later on I had this sort of exhibition which toured around Germany. And this sculpture on the right it's a sort of curious back and forward. This sculpture will be seen in the environment of the National Gallery in Berlin. And these are two sort of Japanese images. This is sort of, and the irony about the kit, that's a sort of box, the lid of a box. But that particular kit, curiously enough, I bought it when I was teaching at Berkeley. And I had such a fantastic problem about bringing baggage back that I gave all the bits and pieces. I kept the box. And, but actually, when I did go to Japan, they have this serial. They have these long, complex serials with these latex monsters and people in wrestling, in these Ultraman. So, I mean, once again, this is back in Ipswich, and on the left is a detail of a print done from an American publisher. And maybe I should just say a few technical notes. I don't do these kind of sculptures anymore, but they were done at that time. I was very much involved with making sculptures in aluminium, using castings, and I found myself often a sort of prisoner of these particular castings that I designed. And I wanted really to use a kind of fluid method of making a sculpture using sheet metal, but using a rolling machine or a folding machine or a press, but doing the kind of things that a sculptor may not be able to do through other technical reasons. And so that's, in a way, I mean, I mean, there is an imaginary idea of Tokyo, there's an imaginary idea of Berlin, the same way there's an imaginary idea of working in Ipswich. I mean, in a sense, that you can get as much technical exactitude in Ipswich as you could get in North London. And on the right there's another metaphor. I think that's Maller's daughter who became a sculptor. But I mean, once again, that's one of my kind of memory traces, one of these kind of shadow images about being in Germany somehow. It's also, as I say, another double metaphor in the sense that it's a kind of popular middle idea of what it means being a sculptor. On the left there is an old abandoned project at Rothschild's Bank in Leather Lane, where I did, very difficult, where I tried to put together some idea of bronze composition. And rather nice pair here. That's East Berlin, that's the culture center. And on the left is just one of my old favorites of but I rather like the idea of on the right you have the East Berlin Culture Center, and on the left you have the real culture. And this is just another natural pair. That's just a small study for an Osaka project, and this is another of the bank. Well, this is quite interesting from my point of view. I mean, one of the things about going to the this is Japan, and the other one is, believe it or not, the Royal Academy. Of this, although there's been a great deal of writing about the idea of giving up the base in sculpture, what I found incredible in Japan at the Kabuki Theatre was the whole idea of wood on the stage and the isolation of the figures. And so in a sense, by making a kind of stage there, I was directly inspired by this Japanese experience. But I suppose one could spend a great deal of time trying to explain this idea that that sculpture doesn't exist anymore because a lot of it has been recut and recycled into other sculptures. I think you'll see a bit later on. A current project I just finished was a group of sculptures for a playground at Wallingford for Terence Conran, where I used some of these elements to re-weld them into a new social situation. And I don't know, I'm still kind of, I gave a great deal of my popular material, very difficult to find words for it, but an enormous amount of magazines I'd bought or accumulated over the years to St Andrews University. And one of the exhibitions they led off with quite recently was on heroes. And in a strange way, I like the idea of Mies van der Rohe as a hero. And I would like, when I'm in Germany, in some way, to make a sort of symbolical portrait of Mies. But so slowly finding my way through to it. And I quite like the idea of Pamela Hansford Johnson's notes on imaginary conversations, like between Voltaire and Madame Pompadour, or great historic figures. And Tom Stoppard's just written a play about, which I heard on the wireless, little bits and pieces of Joyce. I think these imaginary meetings between Joyce and Lennon. So in a strange way, there is a curious kind of possibility of linking Mies van der Rohe with another, although it didn't actually exist, linking the two. I mean,
why is Mies the hero?
Well, I think there's a, I mean, looking around the, I think the sort of grandeur in New York of the Seagram building, I think it's a question of, to me, it's the moving thing about the proportions. And there's something a tremendous grandeur in the National Gallery, I think, you know. And I think that he must have been an admiration of an obsessive. I think he must have been obsessive to have got his own way in that way. And this is two kinds of Berlin, in a way. I mean, the sort of the one on the left I find quite fascinating. There's quite a lot of that. I think that another person at the party was Ed Kienholz, and Kienholz didn't tell me himself, but I think his wife is doing 3,000 photographs of the Berlin Wall, which I think is very, very fascinating. And so you have the two images, the two kind of almost take the old and the new somehow. I like the sort of the memory traces on the left. Well, that's a sort of cannibalized and recycled sculpture. The one on the right has just been done in Ipswich, and it's a group of three which sort of are kind of bolted together, and it's a sort of outside a showroom for Habitat out in Wallingford. But one of the most difficult things I think which is sort of expressed on the one on the left is this idea of sculptures being a very hard physical material, and yet on the other hand the keeping a door open as to the idea of flexibility of actually placing and moving it and adjusting it. Well, there again, one has sort of two memory traces. This is from an old book of, this is another of my kind of in a taxi going from the studio down into town. I can't get my mind away from that kind of image on the left. And this is another couple of old German images. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm in Berlin, in a sense. Just go back to, you see the aeroplane. That is a couple of prints, screen prints I did based on the writings and life of Wittgenstein. But you can see that top left there is a sort of stitched in a Messerschmitt.
Why did you choose Wittgenstein?
Well, at that time, I mean, it's very difficult. At that time, there was a lot of feeling around for heroes. I mean, it was a time of Stuart Tilson and a time of Peter Blake and so on. And at that time, most people preferred a kind of American-type hero. I still like the whole idea of Wittgenstein. I identified, out of the 10 prints or so, 6 of them were based on his life rather than his writings. I identified myself with Wittgenstein in the sense that he was very sort of eccentric, gave away his fortune, did a lot of kind of unusual things, did architecture, and was also this kind of curious, kind of paradoxical foreigner in England. I found it very easy to identify with that kind of, not so much with his writings, but with his life. But it was also, I mean, I'm actually doing some work for a Berlin publisher, and there are going to be 8 prints. It's my next thing on these lines, really, and I'm using Charles Ives, but that's another story. But I mean, it's a similar process. This is, the image on the left is a survival from when Peter Cook mentioned these big slideshows. This was the one on the left was rescued out of Royal College of Art, Dusseldon, long before I taught there. And it was just a sort of negative that they used to make a plate for an issue that was put together by Robin Denny, I think, and Roger Coleman. It was an ambiguous landscape. So this is sort of kind of connection between color and that. This is a sort of collage I did with some available material on top of the mirror. I don't think they're so good, actually, but there was another series of prints which came after the Wittgenstein series that were called As Is Fun, but I sort of tried to bring together certain popular imagery of Mickey Mouse and images from Scientific American printed circuits and cheap wrapping paper. And rather than having Marilyn Monroe, I have Jane Mansfield. Well, here we go back to two images from Japan. Well, one of the strange things about, I don't know if you've seen these television programs on the Japanese experience, but that's the real Japan on the right, and on the left is the artificial Japan. I found that when I went around all these temples, a lot of them had been built, they'd been burnt and been built and rebuilt in the 30s. So a great deal of that old Japanese history is reproduction. That's an old Japanese building, and that's the sort of last of the Wittgensteins. But I was wrong. It wasn't right. Wasn't the last of Wittgenstein. That's one of him going to, this is another situation I identified myself of him going to New York. And this is a Japanese robot, which has, I think, gone up to St. Andrews.
Eduardo, don't you think that the way the Japanese were placed traditionally, it's building works of art, because it didn't last too long, exactly the same way as you would place your own things.
Sorry, I didn't follow. The Japanese replace
Their own works of art, their own artifacts, and so on, because it didn't last too long, and they always replace them traditionally. Okay, look, a reproduction, but it's a reproduction, a reproduction, a reproduction. So you reproduce your own things in a very sinister way.
Wow.
It's imagery again. They like it, otherwise they wouldn't reproduce it.
So where's the one on the right, a reproduction of a reproduction?
Yes.
But what's a reproduction of? Now that makes me feel better. It's very complex, the Japanese experience, because we all went over there, and it was supposed to be sponsored by the Japanese Iron and Steel Federation, but when we got there, it was actually being handled by the Mainichi Press. And after we left, it was actually, all the works were sold to a rich industrialist, and they're all now in the Open Air Museum at Hakone. Well, that's it. So it was quite an interesting project, actually. I don't know if you've been down to 19th century narrow street called Leather Lane, but one of my ideas there was actually a sort of a democratic idea. Actually, that's resting on a concrete slab. There was never any, I don't know where the architects were, but it's very, very kind of stainless steel and marble. Robinson, is there an architect called Robinson? And bound to be, and partners. And my idea was that the actual workers would, the concrete slab had nothing to do with the sculpture. It was actually a kind of cover for vaults and air conditioning for the vault where all the gold was, really. I don't know what they're going to do there. So, curiously enough, two bits of history. The defunct Hanover Gallery on the right, and on the left, perhaps just a little, when you're in Berlin, you see the American Army moving through quite a lot, and everybody's pleased that they're there. It's really occupied city. And went to Brandenburg Gate, and on the right is the Tokyo Tower. There's an awful lot of, I mean, I won't go into it in great depth. There's an awful lot of talk about the quadriga on the top, that at one time it faced one way and now it's facing the other way. And so two images of chaos, really. That's a sculpture being cut up at the Tate. As I said, sorry?
You don't find the Nazis full of reproductions. I mean, you find recreations.
Well, didn't they sort of recreate the Roman Empire? Or?
That's all right. I mean, that's all right. Is it?
No, I'm saying, I mean, this is just a sort of reason for being Berlin, so sort of memory traces on the right, really. And this is the sort of Japanese experience on the left. I think that this is something I was very into, and, which is a sort of early 50s science fiction magazine of the very famous story of a disintegrating, shrinking man. And this is another metaphor on the right of a stripe painting with a flower on it, detail. This is a sort of small section on technology, really. On the left, this is quite some of these very they don't go on in English universities. Very complex man-machine machines they build in MIT and at Stanford, and I think that curiously enough, the experiment on the right is from a French magazine of teaching monkeys to be human. Very good technical museum in Munich that sells a lot of slides. This is, I think, Russian, on the left, Russian aerospace, and rather nice image of electronics from Fortune magazine. This is a great favorite of mine. He's now dead. He used to do a lot of, Arthur Bauerchef used to do a lot of covers and a lot of ad work in American magazines. And this, I think that anthropomorphism that he managed to get over, I think is very strong. And of course, here you have this sort of fantasy, in a sense, and on the right you have very good idea of space, science space research. When I was in Osaka, there was a large exhibition there of electronic hardware, and one of the sculptors gave me a lot of catalogues, and that's a sort of battery of Japanese, I don't know what it is, Japanese instrumentation. And when I went on one occasion to California to work for Art and Technology, and I did this print as a sort of computer type technological image. This is, I did a series of etchings where there were sort of blurred newspaper pictures of, had them sort of airbrushed, but I quite like this idea, talking of heroes, this idea of the, I mean, I think Nixon's a good example, this sort of corporate business school kind of image, but I think it's a very good kind of almost Renaissance type classical composition. I think some of the architects know the image on the right. It comes from Science Journal. It's another experiment in thinking machines at Stanford University. And this is thermal map on the left. This is another of the Wittgenstein prints, which was sort of collaged on a ready-made. And this is, on the right, there's a sort of part of a cheap carpet, of a sort of an assemblage I did in front of a painting. Well, these are two images of technology, if you like. Is it in focus, the one on the... When I was in Osaka, Philip King didn't really... He was quite right that, that Osaka, that was sort of destroyed, 95% destroyed, was a complete sort of city that had been built out of nothing with these entirely concrete city. And this is a Japanese postcard they sell in the cinema. Well, this is a direct connection here. That's the Kabuki Theatre in Tokyo, which doesn't look very good, but it's very, very nice inside. And this is this other grouping of sculpture on what I called a sort of Kabuki-type stage. That's the cover on the left of Science Journal, all on robots, and I don't know if that's a fantasy or not. Another sort of dual. This is, curiously enough, I did a lot of waxworks until the end of the 50s, and then I had this idea of working with some engineers in Ipswich, and the first sculptures I did with the engineers were all cast in bronze, but they called them gunmetal. And I mean, in a strange way, this is sort of a metaphoric image of a kind of Rathaus, a sort of German town hall. And just a rather old survival on the right. This is the first image. I did this set of 9 panels for a castle in Scotland, and that was one of the plaster studies. But you probably wonder what was actually intentional. It seems to be a tremendous kind of rift between the two images. But I mean, in a sense, one is in Berlin in this studio. Once had sent over a lot of the plaster elements to see whether one can continue with the same theme, at least to sort of develop the theme. And simultaneously with that, I'm doing this set of 8 prints for this German publisher on the theme of Charles Ives, and there's a very good book by Wilfrid Mellors on the history of American music. And in the book, there's sort of curious overlaps between the history of jazz with people like Larry Parch and the sort of Duke Ellington, who overlaps with Leonard Bernstein and so on. So to me, I mean, in Berlin, these are two quite living images of Kirk and this plaster. They're both there on the floor. And one of the strange things I found about having an exhibition at the Tate was that certain types of modern art, making fun of modern art was one of the last of the taboo areas. And I think it still is, actually. It's still one of the last of the taboo areas. Well, back to the back to the possible portrait of Schoenberg and hopefully a visit from Mr. Amai in the studio with further talks about bar life in Osaka. I don't know whether it's a sort of very bad slide on the left, but this is the kind of image that would have horrified my father. Who, talking of heroes, Mussolini was my father's great hero. And I rather like this idea of that degree of political caricature, very, very well done. I think one of the most difficult things, I seem to have had these images around for a very, very long time. One on the left reminds me very much of Kubin somehow. There's a sort of 1910 drawing by Kubin that looks like that. And for some very strange way, I had that pinned on my studio door in Paris when I worked there, the one on the right. And I was still absolutely fascinated that somebody could actually carve out of marble a ripped out burst inner tube somehow.
What are they, Eduardo?
Well, what does it say under the one on the right? Well, nobody's been able to identify that. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's a fake. I think it's a fake, really. But it's a fake. It's a fake what? And why was it done? If anybody can come forward after the talk. So here is the sort of recent connection. It's a sort of airbrush rendering of the robot, and rather an old one by Artnetet. I don't know, I'm the last person to talk about this inner psychology of the Japanese mind, but I've never seen so many robots in my life on television or in newspapers or as in Japan. They've really got a very big thing about the robots there. More America, it's a sort of past historic thing. Doesn't exist anymore. Very strong. Fantastic. I don't know. It seems to me much more interesting talking about Japan than California. But one could go from Osaka for very little money by ship to Kobe. Now that's the actual ship. Is Peter still here? Where are you? Am I tied to this microphone? Can I move away?
Yes, sir.
No, I'm not going to take it with me. I was just going to say that this is the prints that quite interest me very much. That I'm doing a whole series of 8 prints while we're on this idea. It seems to electrify me, this idea of which I think interests me very much in sculpture. Actually, these are 2 reconstituted prints which have been cut out. And there's something about the unpremeditated way that the parts link up that kind of fascinate me. And I'm doing that was only one-off that, but rather there's a sort of musical analogy which is difficult to explain. But this is the kind of thing that I rather really want to develop. It's very, to me, it's a very, very important print, that one. I don't know. This is, I mean, I'm much more interested in actually drawing it up rather than using photographic methods, really. But these are pieces from photographically enlarged parts from Scientific American on American striped wrapping paper. It's an obsession. There was very good, very interesting dealer in London called this very strange histoire about the collage on the left of people asking me about this was a tapestry which is in the Tate, and it got there completely by accident. It was by a dealer called Robert Fraser, who knew some lady in Paris who was looking for material to be woven. And it was actually woven, and I didn't know it had been done. Another interesting hero image is Robert Oppenheimer on the left, and on the right there's a bullet train that takes you from Tokyo. I mean, not reading at great length, but tremendous upheavals in Japan, but that was a tremendously fantastic service from Tokyo to Osaka. This is, I mean, I just arrived at this sort of connection on the archigram glass table of a sort of an old drawing, really, and this sort of a topsy head on the left. That's another view of that sculpture. I'm not that interested in that way of working on the left, but I mean at that time I was very preoccupied by the idea that it could only have been done by using a roller, which is thousands of tremendous pressure in order to bend the steel and that's a detail on the right of a parrot in front of a stripe painting, and this is a cabaret. Now we're sort of meanwhile back in Tokyo and back in London. This is, on the left, that's when I just sort of got off waxworks and was working, I was actually at the sort of foundry before I went to Ipswich. I was trying to have pieces of plywood cast and welded. That's outside the palace in Tokyo. These are just some objects bought in the street. Just a comparison between an old and an one of the most difficult things I found that really was articulating about experience. I mean, I never saw either scenes in a way, and this is a sort of slide they sell at the Imperial War Museum where I sometimes draw. This is this, what was a reproduction of a reproduction, this Osaka castle that was rebuilt 4 times, and last time from contributions of the citizens of Osaka, built in 1932, and I think the last time it was struck by lightning. It was made of wood, and it's not now entirely made of reinforced concrete. And this is a sort of wooden study, just wooden study for a ceiling panel. And 2 more sort of stainless steel sculptures. Anyway, I don't think I'm unique. I mean, I've always had this kind of thing about polished look, and this is from an old encyclopedia, from some chromium-plated mythological figure in New York. It's very difficult to explain that quite a lot of these are part of a group at Wallingford at Habitat, made of welded aluminium, and this is really part of 2 other figures. Sorry? That's polished bronze on the left. Also, I sort of thought I'd throw it in, these light shows I did at Cambridge. The insect on the right is survivor from there.
What does it show us?
Well, the notes at the time were about the use of the camera as a sort of illuminating organ, you know, sort of to see details that the human eye doesn't normally see. I don't know if you recognize that where I have some of my prints done is in Tooley Street, which is the same street. This is this big development. I don't know if that building, it's a very moving building, it's going to be pulled down.
It's just been cleaned, has it?
Good, good. I think this is quite a nice connection now, but very difficult to explain that quite a lot of these are part of a group at Wallingford at Habitat, made of welded aluminium, and this is really part of 2 other figures. Sorry? That's polished bronze on the left. Also, I sort of thought I'd throw it in, these light shows I did at Cambridge. The insect on the right is survivor from there.
What does it show?
Well, the notes at the time were about the use of the camera as a sort of illuminating organ, you know, sort of to see details that the human eye doesn't normally see. I don't know if you recognize that where I have some of my prints done is in Tooley Street, which is the same street. This is this big development. I don't know if that building, it's a very moving building, it's going to be pulled down.
It's just been cleaned, actually.
Good, good. Oh, there's quite a nice connection there, but sort of, this is a print I did for a museum in Germany. That's the hopper. That's another plaster study on the left. Did a lot of photographs of contrasting light. I think on the left is this, it's trying to figure out this, as the panel would be on a ceiling, what the effect of light would be on the planes and at different times of the day, and also the kind of very curious perspective. So when one was working on the models, in a sense, one often used to hold them above one's head to try and judge what the effect would be of the light on the shapes. But when I said one had to evolve a kind of technique to do 9 panels, which is very similar to that print that I showed you, of actually doing a master panel and then cutting up the various panels and reconstituting them so that they were kind of locked in to a kind of different meaning. Well, just as a change, I had an exhibition once in Sao Paulo. I had one in Venice in '60, which were mostly bronzes, and then the sort of overlap in Sao Paulo in 1962. This was sort of a lot of postcards at that time. That's Sao Paulo on the right. That when I was in Japan, they were very proud of it's a very concrete city, Japan, or Tokyo then, and this was in steel and glass, and this was a kit that I bought. They're so proud of it, they made a kit of it. Well, the image on the right also is a very, very old survivor, somehow of an airfield being cleared. So there you have a sort of painted aluminium sculpture, and this is a sculpture that was destroyed and reconstituted. It's the floor of the Academy. defunct project on the left of using pigs in for problems of anti-gravity. It was called Operation Barbecue. And they used about 30 pigs for this. So there was a time of kernel stat of what happened on the body with fields of acceleration. Well, on the left again is the magic world of the picture postcard, the deep building, the Japanese government building. Right is, on the right is this ceiling panel which was done in fiberglass. This is that other problem that I sort of touched on about the things in the hopper, is this idea of not having a kind of fixed plan, just actually arranging the objects in different variations as polished aluminium, and using these kind of standard, well, they're not really standard castings, they're castings that I've had the patterns made from drawings. Another pair of buildings.
Where's the building on the left? I mean, right. That fake look?
No, it's just, no, this is the fable of a photographer in Ipswich who sort of can't take it cool. He has to sort of jazz it up a bit. No. Well, I mean, on the right, there's this, when I was teaching in Germany in the 60s, there's a very good bookshop called the Book Cabinet, where one used to go and, at that time, very cheap technical books, and cut them up and do collage. And the image on the left is one I've fenced around with for a long time. I think you can, I'm not sure, see a man's sneakers sticking out somewhere. This is sort of, this is one of the Wallingford sculptures for children to play on. That's another play sculpture on the left. Over here.
What sort of reaction did you get from the people working in the exhibition?
Oh, I've been going there since 1960, you know, and so one built up a kind of curious relationship, a very good one, really. And, I mean, everything has to work successfully with them. It has to be very rationalized. Everything has a job number. And after the first few years, it's like going to live in an English village for the first time. But after a decade, because it's gone beyond that now, it's become a way of life. It's a state of normalcy, really. But I mean, one has to undergo, I mean, to make these things, it has to go through a kind of cycle of normalcy. You know, the castings have to have a job number and all that kind of thing. Well, I mean, I think that we're going to have a little bit of autobiography. This is, on the left, is very sort of current work that's just been finished. And on the right was this way of working with pressing shapes into wax. And there was a tremendous advantage at that time of saving an enormous amount of money by having the wax cast rather than the roundabout way of having molds made of it, which is normal practice. There's two pictures I'd like to see together. The actual studies were done at the college for the ceiling, and this is at Bradford, of translating them into this fiberglass material, which was really 80% aluminium powder in a resin base. Another kind of strange image on the left of some little, from Life magazine, when Life magazine used to do a feature on Talking of Pictures, I think it's called, of some little boy who reconstructed the whole of Manhattan out of cardboard. And they set it up in front of Manhattan. So I thought this was quite a nice pair, really. This is, that's upside down picture. It's a sort of goofy disintegrating. One of the things I wanted to do with this project at the castle was to have one drawing and continue the same drawing all the way through, of having the 9 panels based on the one drawing, and the 3 tapestries also based on the same drawing. And the tapestries were done exactly in the same way, but alert to the disciplines of weaving or making a ceiling, or physical material, of actually cutting up and reconstituting the actual parts. So you get reoccurrence of the same pieces in different kind of tensions, in a sense. This is, meanwhile, back with the robots. I bought the robot on the right in Japan, and this is the kind of things that they have now up at St. Andrews. That's the sort of detail of the tapestry on the left. And that's sort of 3 aluminium sculptures on the right, and this is the detail of the wooden relief. This is sort of, the aluminium sculpture on the right, as I did 2 versions, was, I mean, sort of rather an architectonic theme. And this is also autobiographical of, I mean, I actually like, after a lot of time, I like actually seeing these images again, because it's sort of kind of coming back to some way of thinking I have about, it's a sort of metaphoric portrait of Saint Sebastian, and in a roundabout way what I've shown you about just little openings about Schoenberg, in a symbolical way. This is how I'd like to do Schoenberg, in a way. And also this is from the past. This is sort of drawing on the right of another of my heroes, Sikorsky, which was from the cover of Time magazine, and then a sort of invented head on the left. And I don't know if this is an obvious connection, but Tokyo again, and then this sort of slanting shot of this wooden relief. Then this is something else that one sees on the Archigram slide table of curious kind of memory trace connections that one didn't think about at the time between choice of colors and shape. And called Farewell Japan, I hope. That particular shape on the right is something which I've had enlarged. It's something I want to do more with. It's not really farewell, hello again, Japan. This is another of these curious type of connections. I like to think that these images are self-explanatory. There's a lot of offcuts, cutting out in plywood, a lot of offcuts, so that in the sort of way that the little image in the box on the left were all just offcuts. Two more details of the tapestry. This is very strange. I didn't think they were brilliant, but two productions of something called just boxes of images, and there was a phone call of somebody from Langevin who wanted to use the images for, they did a whole collection at Langevin of this box of, and I didn't get any money, but I persuaded them to give two dresses to the V&A. I think they're really bizarre. I don't really like them. But it's, it's dotty in the right way. The sculpture on the left, that's a sort of tapestry on the right that belongs to the Whitworth. And sculpture on the left was called Study for Glass. It's done in two parts, which are 14 feet long, so it's 24 feet long. But I really wanted it, if it was possible, to have it made in glass. That's the one in Hakone. I never saw it completed, actually. These slides were given to me by some architect who went there. In two little studies. This is two kinds of heads. The sort of collage, for some reason I did when I was at the Slade. It's just a sort of idea of a head, and then there's a sort of ready-made head on the right, quite recent, which had something to do with a big thing about crash dummies at the time. And this is an old and new. This is, when I used to work in Paris, I used to sort of press shapes into clay and pour plaster on and take it off that. And so there's an old relief there. And a new one on the table. And that's also kind of, that sculpture on the left doesn't exist anymore. That's all been reconstituted. And that's a sort of collage on top of a drawing. It's rather an old collage. This is sort of two images of actually what I call process, but still involved with wax, so dipping a plaster figure in wax. And these are just sort of wax fragments, very, very old. And the one on the the one on the right was made from wax and directly cast. And I think the one on the left was directly, it's the first time I made a three-dimensional object by pouring plaster into clay negative. When I was in California, Ed Kienholz left a sort of image for me, which was really in exchange for an artwork. And when I saw him in Berlin, he was a bit shirty, but it's because I didn't fork out with my artwork. So I gave him that. He's very pleased. I gave him these pair of sort of Kings Road Vietnam boots on the right, which he has on his mantelpiece. And sort of Old and New Again, that's sort of a very old survivor of pressing found objects into a clay bed. And this was sort of just cutting bits of scrap wood up and making reliefs and pushing it into 3 dimensions on the left. I'm not sure. I think I somehow feel that's the entrance to the Museum of Modern Art in New York on the right. But I mean, the very first time I went to New York, I was really knocked out by the way they used stainless steel and glass and sort of street furniture. So there's another image of the defunct Hanover Gallery. Series of etchings on the right. That's a sort of, both sort of rather called, they were sort of fact and fantasy in the technological world. And on the right there's a sort of Russian atomic station. On the left there's a sort of fantastic supermarket robot. I rather like this talk. I put them together as pairs. I mean, this is, I mean, I've never seen these slides before, projected like this. But I like the translation of one medium into the other. These are 2 tape pictures. The one on the left is an enlargement of the Vietnam boat with a snail crawling on it, which is what I felt about the war at that time. And on the right there is another survivor of the early Cambridge exhibition, and on the left is a sort of computer-type print, which is a sort of slight pun on Vasarely. That's the tallest stainless steel sculpture I did.
How tall is it?
About 10 feet. This is one might almost call 2 urban views. Well, this is Old and New Again. There was a time when I used to buy a lot of kits and nail them to pieces of wood and paint them with black or going way back. So paint them with black paint or cover them with black wax. That's also a very, very old relief on the right. I don't really have an obsession about these anymore. That's all sort of practically done. I'd practically no money when I was in Paris and did a lot of plasters and had them sand cast when I came back to England. And this is one of the survivors of that period on the left. And that's part of a group called Rio on the left. And the one on the right is called Crash. I think the one on the right is in Freiburg. So some German architects bought it, and they were terribly worried because these children kept playing on it, and I told them it didn't really matter. Two more sculptures in transition. Some more. Another 60. Well, this is back in the middle of the 60s when I used to. This is the Ipswich scene of having sculptures polished, and the sculpture on the right's in Aberdeen there, and the one on the left went on turn. There's this terrible problem with aluminium of oxidization, so I had to paint it eventually. And this is a mixture of castings and stock material. One on the right now is painted, and one on the left is in Germany. That's two views of the same object.
Is there any clear marks you can use to stop oxidization?
Well, as this morning at 7:30, there's a sculpture was manhandled into the Meridiana on the terrace, and there's a nice young man who claims that he's got a service of putting a sort of new kind of plastic varnish on it, polishing it and varnishing, and he says it's good for 5 years. You can now, I think, one of these new Museum of Modern Art have a sculpture which they've got a lacquer on, and that's outside. There is now, but this is 6 years ago. And this is, I don't know, it seems to have, this is, seems rather tedious, but that's the tapestry and the ceiling panel again. Well, these are very, very old images. That's what I was explaining to about pressing objects into a clay bed and pouring the wax on. The big, big advantage being that costs at least more than 1/3 of the cost, is actually if you give a plaster object to a foundry, they have to mold it off. But if you give them a wax, it's much cheaper. Also, it's a very nice, alive, creative way of doing things. And just the detail of a square, a wooden toy being pressed into clay with that pickup you get directly without any molding. And that's at that time, that was how these objects were made. A lot of people say to me they prefer these to what I do now, but I still can't stand them, really. That's the Hanover, and that's one of the workshops in Ipswich. That's the sculpture you've seen before it was painted. This, I think, is the tapestry being woven. That's the castle in Scotland on the left. This is about, that was made of stainless steel, the one on the left. That's about as simple as I ever got there. But at that time, I wanted to do these things in glass. It's pair of heads. That's the boats. These are sort of two Tate pictures. And these are, well, the one on the left is called Chair, but they're both table sculptures. That's that's 6 of the 9 panels on the ceiling with the tapestries leading up to them. The sculpture on the right, you've seen that before, it's rearranged, called Domino, and the one on the right is called Crash. Now, I rather like sort of pairing off a sculpture with a building. The sculpture on the right, that is called Mainspar, and I have that, I think you'll see it, I'll point it out later. It's cut in two and rebuilt into another one. No reliefs. That's the fiberglass version on the left. To details. Thought I'd throw them because I haven't seen them myself for a long time. These are two early works that, like that other one, they were made in plaster and brought back in pieces and cast in sand cast in a little foundry in Tottenham Mews called Wilkinson's. Now it's the wax period. No, we didn't. New relief. That's old and new again. There's a snail. That image on the right is another survivor. It's a sort of part of an Egyptian painting I like very much. It's another part of the same painting. It's old and new again. More of these early sandcast sculptures. This is the, these are one of the images, that's one of the reconstituted sculptures in the playground at Wallingford. I think that yellow sculpture I showed you called Main Star, that was cut, and parts of Main Star are on the top of that object. It's a group of actual aluminium sculptures for children to fantasize around. They're sort of all carefully arranged in a kind of group.
How much do you like the background in these photos?
Well, it's not the real background, but I mean it's just a sort of progress, you know, it's just worth keeping a record, really, until the proper ones are done.
They seem to be very sympathetic, you know, the accident juxtaposition of anything in the background.
I mean, it's real, that's where they're done.
Yeah. I wondered how, you know, you seem from the tapestry to be able to translate something which is three-dimensional. And no matter what it is, put it into two-dimensional, make it flat. And you seem to be able to play with it together. I wonder how much you were interested in what the accident happened in the photograph. What you were doing.
Well, even at the engineers there's a lot of space, but the space even there is limited, and I just, you know, they just had to be photographed that way before they went off to the final site, really. But I mean, when they were put on site, their location was very clearly defined. I quite like it, so sort of anonymous workaday setting. I mean, that's the real background that they're done in.
Yeah. It seems that if you had a nice piece of trunking perhaps in the background, it might almost take over from the foreground.
Yes.
Eduardo,
Yeah.
why don't you ever, you cut up a lot of sculptures and put them together, why don't you ever cut up different parts of the material?
I do.
I mean, you always keep within your set box. You never cut up a set of tapestries and put them on the set of material.
It'll come.
This
Oh, thanks. I expected somebody to say something. No. Why didn't you speak up?